Jake Castellano's blood turned to ice as he watched the young mother clutch $50 like it was salvation itself. Her son's bike, still decorated with superhero stickers, disappeared into his bodyguard's trunk while the kid tried not to cry. That's when Jake realized someone had crossed a line that should never be crossed. They'd stolen everything from a family with nothing left to lose. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Your support helps me bring more stories like this one. 2 hours earlier, Jake had been reviewing cryptocurrency transactions in his Vegas penthouse, wondering how someone had managed to siphon $3 million from his organization's digital wallets. The theft was sophisticated, surgical, and personal. Someone with insider knowledge had bypassed his security protocols and vanished with enough money to fund a small war. "Boss," Tony, his lieutenant, had knocked on the door. "We found something." Jake minimized the blockchain analytics on his screen. At 28, he'd been running this operation for 18 months since inheriting it from his uncle. Unlike the old-school bosses who still counted cash in briefcases, Jake moved money through cryptocurrency exchanges and digital investments, though he was still learning the more complex aspects of blockchain security. "The hacker left a trail," Tony continued, setting down a tablet. "Real sloppy, like they wanted us to follow it." Jake studied the IP traces, the digital breadcrumbs that led to a modest apartment complex in Henderson. Either they were dealing with an amateur, or someone was playing a very dangerous game. "Get the car," Jake said, slipping his Glock into his shoulder holster. "Time to pay a visit." The apartment complex was the kind of place where dreams went to die slowly. Cracked sidewalks, rusted railings, and the perpetual smell of disappointment hanging in the desert air. Jake adjusted his Hugo Boss suit jacket. Even revenge required proper presentation. They climbed to the second floor, following the trail to apartment 2B. Jake could hear voices inside, tense and desperate. "Told you, Danny, I don't have it yet," a woman's voice, strained with exhaustion. "Time's up, Sarah. My boss doesn't give extensions." Jake nodded to Tony, who knocked. The conversation inside went silent. A young woman opened the door, her face pale with fear that deepened when she saw them. Sarah Walsh, according to their intel. 26 years old, single mother, worked 2 jobs until she'd been fired from both last week. Behind her, a heavy-set man in an ill-fitting suit turned toward the door. "Mrs. Walsh," Jake said politely, "we need to talk." Danny, Jake recognized him as muscle for the Torino family, reached for his gun. Jake was faster. His pistol appeared in his hand like magic, trained on Danny's forehead before the man's weapon cleared his holster. "I wouldn't," Jake said conversationally. "Tony gets upset when people draw guns in front of children." Through the doorway, Jake could see a boy, maybe 6 years old, huddled on a worn couch. The kid's eyes were wide with the kind of terror that would stick with him forever. "Easy, friend," Danny said, hands raised. "This is Torino business." "Funny thing about that," Jake replied, stepping into the apartment. "Someone used Mrs. Walsh's identity to steal from me. Significant money. So now it's Castellano business." The color drained from Danny's face. Everyone in Vegas knew Jake Castellano wasn't someone you crossed twice and lived to regret it. "Look, Castellano, we can work something out." "Get out!" Danny didn't need to be asked twice. He practically sprinted for the stairs, leaving behind the stench of fear sweat and cheap cologne. Jake holstered his weapon and turned to Sarah, who was clutching her son protectively. The apartment was sparse, clean but desperate. No TV, no decorations, just the bare minimum of furniture and a refrigerator that hummed ominously in the silence. "Mrs. Walsh," Jake said gently, "we need to discuss your recent ventures into cryptocurrency fraud." "I don't know what you're talking about," she whispered. Jake pulled out his phone, showing her the blockchain transactions. $3 million, transferred using your social security number, your mother's maiden name and your son's birthday as authentication keys. He looked around the apartment. "Either you're the worst criminal in history or someone's setting you up." Sarah's knees gave out. She sank onto the couch next to her son, tears streaming down her face. "I lost my jobs," she whispered. "Both of them. The diner said they couldn't afford to keep me, and the cleaning service let me go for being late too often. But I was only late because Tommy was sick, and I couldn't afford the daycare and—" "Mommy?" The boy looked up at her with eyes too old for his face. "It's okay, baby," Sarah said. But her voice broke on the words. Jake studied them both, his anger shifting targets. Someone had stolen his money, yes, but they'd also stolen something far more valuable from this family, their dignity, their security, their hope. "Mrs. Walsh, when did you last eat?" She blinked at the question. What? Food. When did you last have a meal? Yesterday morning. But Tommy had breakfast today and lunch and… Jesus, Tony muttered behind him. Jake pulled out his wallet, counting hundreds. There's a grocery store downstairs. Tony's going to take you and Tommy shopping. Buy whatever you need. I can't accept charity, Sarah said weakly. It's not charity. Jake sat across from her, his voice taking on an edge that suggested argument would be unwise. Someone stole my money using your identity. That makes you a victim, not a suspect. I protect my victims, Mrs. Walsh. It's bad for business when innocent people get hurt on my watch. The truth was more complex, of course. In Jake's world, reputation was everything. But there were different kinds of reputation. Some would call it soft. Others would recognize it as the kind of power move that inspired loyalty and fear in equal measure. Who has access to your personal information? Jake asked while Tony took Sarah and Tommy downstairs. While they were gone, Jake examined the apartment more carefully. Laptop on the kitchen table, older model but functional. Student loan documents scattered across the counter. Credit card statements showing a steady descent into debt, then sudden massive payments to offshore accounts. Payments Sarah clearly hadn't made. His phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. Check your email. Jake opened his encrypted messaging app. A video file, timestamped from 3 hours ago. He pressed play and felt his blood pressure spike. The video showed Danny and another man in a coffee shop across from Sarah's apartment building. They were counting cash, laughing about something. The audio was crystal clear. Stupid woman will never figure it out. Boss says frame the single mom. Let Castellano think she's the thief. By the time he realizes what really happened, we'll be in Costa Rica. What about the kid? Collateral damage. Not our problem. Jake closed the phone, his jaw tight enough to crack teeth. He'd been right. Someone was playing a dangerous game. They'd stolen his money, framed an innocent woman, and put a child in danger to cover their tracks. The Torino family had just declared war. They simply didn't know it yet. 20 minutes later, Sarah and Tommy returned with grocery bags and the first genuine smiles Jake had seen from either of them. Thank you, Sarah said simply. Don't thank me yet, Jake replied, standing. Mrs. Walsh, you and Tommy are going to stay somewhere safe tonight. And tomorrow we're going to have a conversation with the people who really stole my money. I don't understand. Jake looked at the boy, who was carefully arranging his new action figures on the couch. Kids that age collected things, treasured them, built their worlds around small objects that made them feel secure. Tommy, Jake said, what's your favorite thing in the whole world? The boy looked up shyly. My bike. It has Spider-Man on it. And it's really fast. Where's your bike now? Tommy's face fell. Mommy had to sell it. We needed money for food. Something cold and final settled in Jake's chest. He'd seen a lot of cruelty in his 28 years, but watching a kid's face crumble over a lost bicycle hit differently than anything he'd experienced in the family business. We're going to get your bike back, Jake said quietly. Really? Really? And then we're going to make sure nobody ever takes anything from you again. As they prepared to leave the apartment, Jake's phone rang. Unknown number. Castellano. Mr. Castellano, this is Dr. Patterson at Valley Hospital. We have a patient here, Danny Torino. He's asking for you. Jake smiled, but it wasn't warm. I'll be right there. Danny Torino was conscious, which was more than he deserved. Jake stood at the foot of the hospital bed, studying the man who'd thought framing a desperate mother was good business strategy. Both of Danny's arms were broken, and someone had written thief across his forehead in permanent marker. Funny thing about hospitals, Jake said conversationally. They ask so many questions when someone shows up beaten half to death, unless, of course, that someone has a reputation for asking the wrong questions himself. Danny's eyes darted between Jake and Tony, who was reading a medical chart like it contained the secrets of the universe. Says here you fell down some stairs, Tony announced. Clumsy of you, Danny, especially those stairs behind the abandoned warehouse on Industrial Boulevard. You know, the one that doesn't actually have stairs. Castellano, Danny wheezed through swollen lips. I can explain. I'm sure you can. Jake pulled up a chair, settling in like he had all the time in the world. But first, let me share what I've figured out. Your boss, Vincent Torino, needed quick cash for his gambling debts. Real money, not the digital pennies he's been trading. So he decided to steal from me. Danny's silence was telling. But Vincent's old school, Jake continued. Doesn't understand cryptocurrency, blockchain technology, the complexity of modern financial crime. So he hired someone who does. Someone smart enough to hack my systems, but stupid enough to leave a trail leading straight to an innocent woman. You don't understand the whole picture. Oh, but I do. Jake leaned forward. See, while you were busy terrorizing Sarah Walsh and her 6-year-old son, I had my tech guy dig deeper. Your hacker goes by the name Cypher Mage online. Real name is Kevin Brennan, 24 years old, MIT dropout, currently residing in a very expensive penthouse that he definitely can't afford on his legitimate income. Danny's face went pale. Kevin's got a problem, Danny. He likes to brag. Posted about his latest score on a few dark web forums complete with screenshots of my wallet addresses. Amateur mistake from someone who thought he was untouchable. Jake stood, straightening his suit jacket. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to call Vincent and tell him that Jake Castellano wants to meet. Tonight. Neutral ground. And if I don't... Jake pulled out his phone, showing Danny a photo. Sarah and Tommy, safe in a hotel suite, eating room service pizza and watching cartoons. Then I start returning the favor. But instead of targeting innocent families, I'll work my way through the Torino organization. Starting with Vincent's grandson's soccer team. The threat was empty. Jake had never harmed a child, would never consider it. But Danny didn't know that. In their world, reputation was built on whispered stories and unconfirmed rumors. You're insane, Danny breathed. I'm practical. Your boss stole from me and tried to frame an innocent woman to cover his tracks. In the process, he put a kid's safety at risk and made me look weak in front of my organization. Those are the kinds of mistakes that require correction. Jake nodded to Tony, who pulled out a burner phone and placed it on the hospital bed. Make the call, Danny. Vincent has until midnight to meet me at the old Caesar's parking garage. Level 3, north corner. He comes alone, or this gets much more complicated for everyone involved. Danny's hands shook as he dialed. While Danny made arrangements for his own boss's funeral, because that's what this meeting would be one way or another, Jake stepped into the hallway to check his secure messages. $3 million had been a significant loss, but not devastating. Jake's operation pulled in decent money annually through investments and less legal ventures, though he was still building his resources compared to more established organizations. What mattered was the principle. In his business, allowing theft to go unpunished was the same as advertising weakness. His phone buzzed with a message from his tech specialist, a freelancer who went by the handle Ghost and had proven reliable for tracking digital footprints and basic surveillance work. Kevin Brennan located. Currently at Aria Casino, high-stakes poker room. Brought backup drives and a laptop. Looks like he's planning to disappear tonight. Jake typed back, "Can you delay him without raising suspicion? I can trigger a fire alarm in that section of the casino. Force evacuation, but it'll look like a legitimate safety issue," Jake considered. It was risky, but they needed Kevin contained until they could deal with Vincent. Do it, but make it look completely legitimate. 20 minutes later, news reports were covering a minor electrical issue at the Aria that had forced a partial evacuation. Jake smiled. Ghost was worth the money he paid for these specialized services. "Boss," Tony said, returning from Danny's room, "Vincent agreed to the meeting, but he wants to bring 2 bodyguards. Tell him he can bring an army if it makes him feel safer. Won't matter." They left the hospital and drove through Vegas, the city's neon circus providing an appropriately surreal backdrop for what was shaping up to be a significant change in the local power structure. Jake had inherited his position 18 months ago when his uncle died suddenly, but he'd been preparing for leadership since his early 20s. Unlike the old generation of crime bosses, Jake understood that the future belonged to those who could adapt. Cryptocurrency, digital payments, online operations, these were the tools of modern organized crime. Physical violence was still necessary sometimes, but it was crude, inefficient, and attracted unwanted attention from federal agencies. "You really think Vincent's desperate enough to steal from us?" Tony asked as they pulled into a hotel parking garage. "I think Vincent's scared," Jake replied. "Scared men make stupid decisions. His territory's been shrinking. His legitimate businesses are failing and he's got serious gambling debts. Vincent needs a big score to stay relevant." They took the elevator to a mid-level suite where Jake maintained safe space for situations exactly like this one. Sarah and Tommy were secure, fed, and under guard. The boy was asleep on the couch, clutching a new Spider-Man action figure. Sarah sat by the window, staring out at the lights of Las Vegas, like she couldn't quite believe where her day had taken her. "Mr. Castellano," she said when he entered, "I don't understand what's happening. Vincent Torino and his people stole my money and tried to make it look like you did it. They chose you because you're vulnerable. Single mother, financial problems, no resources to fight back. Jake poured himself a glass of water, considering how much truth to share. They underestimated me. Are we safe? Yes. But tomorrow, things might get complicated in Las Vegas. Vincent and I are going to have a conversation tonight that will determine how this situation resolves. Sarah was quiet for a moment, watching her sleeping son. That man, Danny, he said we owed money. Gambling debts, but I've never gambled, never even bought a lottery ticket. Identity theft, Jake explained. Someone's been using your information to create financial obligations that don't belong to you. Credit cards, loans, casino markers. All of it fake but legally tied to your name. How is that possible? Jake showed her his phone, displaying Kevin Brennan's social media profiles. This is the man who stole from both of us. He's young, talented with computers, and apparently believes he's smarter than everyone else. Classic mistake. At 11:45 p.m., Jake stood in the shadows of the Caesars parking garage, watching Vincent Torino approach with exactly 2 bodyguards, as promised. The old man moved carefully, his arthritis obvious even from a distance. At 68, Vincent represented everything Jake's generation was replacing: outdated methods, unnecessary violence, and a fundamental misunderstanding of how modern crime worked. "Vincent," Jake called out as the 3 men reached the designated meeting spot. "Castellano." Vincent's voice carried the weight of old disappointments and recent desperation. "I'm here, now what? Now you explain why you thought stealing from me was a sustainable business strategy." Vincent's bodyguards shifted nervously, hands moving toward weapons they'd never get the chance to use. Jake could see Tony and 2 other associates positioned strategically around the garage. If this went badly, it would go badly for Vincent very quickly. "Times are tough," Vincent said. "Everyone's feeling the pressure. Your operation is growing while older families struggle to survive. Maybe it's time for some redistribution of wealth." Jake laughed, the sound echoing off concrete walls. Redistribution? That's a funny way to describe theft, extortion, and conspiracy to frame an innocent woman. The woman has a name. Sarah Walsh. And she has a 6-year-old son named Tommy, who had to watch his mother sell his bicycle to buy food because your operation destroyed her credit and got her fired from both her jobs. Something shifted in Vincent's expression. Maybe even dinosaurs like him retained some vestige of humanity when it came to children. "I didn't know about the kid," Vincent said quietly. "That makes it worse, not better. Means you were so sloppy, so desperate, that you didn't even bother to research your scapegoat." Jake stepped closer, his voice dropping to the register that made subordinates nervous and enemies consider career changes. "Here's what's going to happen, Vincent. You're going to return my $3 million. You're going to pay for Sarah Walsh's damages, lost income, credit repair, emotional distress, and you're going to eliminate the people responsible for this catastrophically stupid plan. And if I refuse, then I'll do it myself. Starting with Kevin Brennan, moving on to Danny, and ending with you. But first I'll make sure everyone in Vegas knows exactly how the Torino family operates, stealing from stronger organizations and terrorizing innocent families to cover their tracks." Vincent was quiet for a long moment, weighing his options. In the distance, Jake could hear the eternal sounds of Las Vegas. Traffic, sirens, the mechanical dings of slot machines, the dreams and desperate hopes of people who thought they could beat the house. "The money's gone," Vincent finally admitted. "Spent. Needed it to cover debts." Jake had expected this. "Then you'll work it off. Your legitimate businesses, your territory, your operations, everything gets absorbed into my organization until the debt is settled. Think of it as a hostile takeover with guns. That's my life's work. Should have thought of that before you decided to steal from me." Jake pulled out his phone, showing Vincent a video feed that Ghost had managed to obtain from a security camera near Vincent's house. "Your granddaughter Emma is 7 years old," Jake said conversationally. "Same age as Tommy. She likes unicorns and wants to be a veterinarian when she grows up. Very sweet child." Vincent's face went white. I wouldn't hurt her, but I will make sure she grows up knowing exactly what kind of man her grandfather was. I'll make sure the entire family understands that their financial security, their reputation, their safety, all of it depends on your decisions tonight." The threat was more sophisticated than simple violence. Jake was offering Vincent a choice between destruction and absorption, between losing everything and losing everything slowly. You have 48 hours to transfer ownership of your operations to me, Jake continued. After that, I start collecting the debt through less pleasant methods. Vincent nodded slowly, the weight of defeat settling on his shoulders like a familiar coat. As the old man walked away, Jake felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and disappointment. He'd won, but it felt hollow. Vincent wasn't worthy competition, just a desperate old criminal who'd made the mistake of targeting the wrong family. The real victory would come tomorrow, when he returned Tommy's bicycle and watched the boy's face light up with joy. In a business built on fear and violence, those moments of genuine happiness were more valuable than any cryptocurrency transfer. But first, he had Kevin Brennan to deal with. Timeline, 1 week after. Kevin Brennan's apartment looked like a tech startup had exploded inside a paranoid survivalist's bunker. 7 monitors displayed cryptocurrency markets, blockchain analytics, and what appeared to be a sophisticated home security system. The 24-year-old hacker was exactly what Jake had expected. Brilliant, arrogant, and completely unprepared for the consequences of stealing from organized crime. "Kevin," Jake said, stepping over a pile of empty energy drink cans, "we need to chat." The young man spun around in his gaming chair, nearly falling over in his haste. His pale skin and bloodshot eyes suggested he hadn't seen sunlight in weeks, sustaining himself entirely on caffeine and the adrenaline of thinking he was untouchable. "Who the hell are you? How did you get in here?" Jake gestured to the apparently sophisticated security setup. "Your system has a weakness. Someone who goes by Ghost found a vulnerability in your network setup." Kevin's face went through several interesting color changes as he processed this information. "That's impossible. I built this system myself. Multiple layers of encryption, biometric locks. Did you secure your building's main internet connection? Sometimes the weakest link isn't your personal system." The question hung in the air, while Kevin's brain caught up to the implications. Ghost had been monitoring the building's network traffic, learning patterns and identifying Kevin's location through basic digital surveillance. "You're Jake Castellano," Kevin said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Took you long enough. For someone who prides himself on information gathering, you were remarkably ignorant about who you were stealing from." Jake walked around the apartment, noting the expensive equipment, the unopened packages of high-end electronics, the general mess of someone who'd suddenly acquired more money than sense. On one monitor, Kevin had been tracking the cryptocurrency he'd stolen, $3 million spread across multiple digital wallets, probably thinking that complexity would provide security. "I can give it back," Kevin said quickly. "All of it with interest. That's a start. But we're going to discuss why you thought framing Sarah Walsh was necessary. That wasn't my idea. Vincent's people said they needed a fall guy, someone the cops would believe. I just provided the technical expertise." Jake turned to face him, and Kevin shrank back in his chair. "So you chose a single mother with a young child because she seemed like an easy target. It was just business." The words died in Kevin's throat as Jake moved closer. The young hacker probably outweighed Jake by 50 pounds, but weight meant nothing when one person was a predator and the other was prey. "Kevin, let me explain something about my business. We steal from criminals. We extort from criminals. We occasionally find it necessary to eliminate criminals, but we don't target innocent families. We don't terrorize children, and we especially don't destroy people who are already struggling just to cover our own tracks." Jake pulled up a chair, sitting close enough that Kevin had to work to maintain eye contact. "Do you know what happened to Sarah Walsh because of your little scheme? She's fine. She lost both her jobs because Vincent's people called her employers claiming she was under federal investigation for financial crimes. She's 3 months behind on rent. Her son had to watch her sell his bicycle, his most prized possession, to buy groceries. And through all of this, she had no idea why her life was falling apart." Kevin was sweating now, despite the apartment's aggressive air conditioning. "Look, I'll fix it. I'll transfer the money back, clear her credit, whatever you want." "You'll do all of that," Jake agreed. "But first, you're going to help me with something else." Jake pulled out his phone, showing Kevin a banking app interface. "This is Vincent Torino's personal account. It currently contains about $40,000, which represents the last of his liquid assets. I want you to donate it to the Children's Hospital of Nevada. Anonymous donation, completely untraceable, in the name of Tommy Walsh." Kevin stared at the phone. "That's it? Just move the money?" "Just move the money." As Kevin worked, Jake studied the young man's setup. The apartment was expensive, probably cost more per month than Sarah Walsh made in 3 months. The equipment alone represented a significant investment, though not quite the military-grade fortress Kevin had pretended it was. "Where did Vincent find you?" Jake asked. "Dark web forum. I had a reputation for financial intrusion, cryptocurrency manipulation. He offered me a percentage of whatever I could steal, plus a bonus for making it look like someone else did it. And you never thought to research who you were targeting?" Kevin's hands paused over the keyboard. "I knew you were connected, but I figured 3 million was small enough to fly under the radar. Most of your operation is legitimate business, right? I thought maybe you wouldn't notice for weeks, maybe months." Jake laughed, genuinely amused. "Kevin, I notice when someone takes $1 from my operations. You stole 3 million and left a trail that led directly to an innocent woman. Did you really think I wouldn't investigate? Vincent said you were old school, that you wouldn't understand the technical aspects. Vincent's been wrong about a lot of things lately." The money transfer completed with a soft chime. $40,000, representing Vincent Torino's last liquid assets, now belonged to an organization that would use it to help sick children instead of funding criminal enterprises. "Done," Kevin said. "Now what?" Jake stood, straightening his jacket. "Now you disappear. Leave Las Vegas, leave Nevada, preferably leave the country. Find a legitimate use for your skills, cybersecurity, software development, anything that doesn't involve stealing from people." "That's it? You're just letting me go?" "Kevin, you're 24 years old. You're brilliant, talented, and apparently capable of learning from your mistakes. Killing you would be wasteful. But if I ever hear your name in connection with organized crime again, if you ever target another innocent family, if you so much as jaywalk in a city where I have influence—" Jake let the threat hang unfinished. Sometimes imagination was more effective than explicit detail. "I understand," Kevin whispered. "Excellent. You have 6 hours to pack whatever fits in 2 suitcases. I'll have someone monitor your movements until you're safely out of my territory. After that, you're on your own." As Jake walked toward the door, Kevin called out behind him, "Mr. Castellano, the woman Sarah, she really doesn't know anything about any of this?" Jake paused. "She's a waitress who was working 2 jobs to support her son. The most sophisticated technology she owns is a 10-year-old laptop she uses to apply for jobs online. What do you think?" Outside Kevin's apartment building, Tony was waiting with the car. As they drove back toward the hotel, Jake felt a strange sense of completion. The money would be returned, Sarah's credit would be repaired, and Vincent's organization would be absorbed into his own operation within 48 hours. "Boss," Tony said, "what about Danny?" "What? Guy's still in the hospital. Danny's going to recover fully, and then he's going to spend the rest of his life working in legitimate employment. I'm thinking construction, or maybe food service, something that keeps his hands busy and his mind off crime. And if he doesn't want to go legitimate?" Jake pulled out his phone, showing Tony a video clip. Danny, beaten and broken, lying in the hospital bed with "thief" written across his forehead. This goes viral on every social media platform in Nevada. No criminal organization will ever trust him again, and no legitimate employer will hire him. Sometimes social media justice is more effective than physical violence. They pulled into the hotel's parking garage, and Jake felt his phone buzz with a message from Ghost. "Kevin Brennan has purchased a plane ticket to Toronto. Departing in 4 hours. Should I continue monitoring?" Jake typed back, "Until he clears U.S. airspace. After that, he's not our problem unless he makes himself our problem. Vincent Torino is liquidating assets faster than expected. Looks like he's planning to transfer control by tomorrow morning. Good. Send Sarah Walsh's credit reports to my secure account. I want to see exactly how much damage we need to repair." Already done. Also, I located Tommy's bicycle. This was why Jake paid Ghost well for reliable services. The freelancer anticipated needs before they became requests. "Where?" "Pawn shop on East Charleston. Owner purchased it this afternoon from Vincent's nephew for $50. I convinced him that it was stolen property and he should return it to its rightful owner." "How did you convince him?" "I mentioned that Jake Castellano was personally interested in the bicycle's return to a 6-year-old boy named Tommy Walsh. He became very cooperative very quickly." Jake smiled. Reputation was indeed everything in his business. The fact that a pawn shop owner would voluntarily return merchandise rather than risk Jake's displeasure spoke to the careful cultivation of his public image over the past 18 months. Back in the hotel suite, Sarah and Tommy were awake despite the late hour. The boy was drawing pictures with crayons provided by room service, while Sarah sat at the table reading what appeared to be legal documents. "Mr. Castellano," she said when he entered, "these papers say my credit score is being restored and my employment record is being corrected. How is that possible?" "Good lawyers and reliable connections," Jake replied truthfully. "By tomorrow morning, you'll have clean credit, verified employment history, and about 6 months of living expenses in a new bank account." "I can't accept." "Mrs. Walsh, someone used your identity to commit crimes and destroyed your financial stability in the process. This isn't charity, it's restitution." Tommy looked up from his drawing. "Mr. Jake, are you really going to get my bike back?" "Already done, buddy. It'll be here in the morning." The boy's face lit up with pure joy, the kind of expression that reminded Jake why he'd chosen this particular path. In a business built on fear and control, moments of genuine happiness were both rare and precious. "Tommy," Jake said, crouching down to the boy's eye level, "can you keep a secret?" The child nodded seriously. "Sometimes grown-ups do bad things to other grown-ups, but the most important rule is that we never let bad things happen to families, especially kids, do you understand? Like how Spider-Man protects people? Exactly like Spider-Man." As the sun began to rise over Las Vegas, painting the desert sky in shades of orange and gold, Jake stood at the window watching the city wake up. Somewhere out there, Vincent Torino was probably having the worst morning of his life. Kevin Brennan was boarding a plane to start over in another country. Danny was learning that actions had consequences. And here in this hotel suite, a mother and her son were safe, fed, and surrounded by the kind of security that money couldn't buy. The protection of someone powerful enough to ensure that what happened to them would never happen again. Jake's phone buzzed with one final message from Ghost. Vincent Torino officially transferred all business interests to Castellano Holdings at 6:47 a.m. Legal documents filed, assets transferred, operation complete. What should I do with the original theft evidence? Jake typed back, "Archive everything." Someday someone will write a case study about what happens when you steal from the wrong person and target the wrong family. And Mrs. Walsh? She gets a new job, something better than what she lost. And Tommy gets a college fund. Understood. Anything else? Jake looked at the sleeping boy curled up on the couch with his new action figure, completely oblivious to the fact that his mother's fortunes had changed overnight. "Schedule a meeting with my accountant. I want to establish a scholarship fund at UNLV, full rides for single parents pursuing degrees that lead to stable employment, in whose name Tommy Walsh Memorial Fund for Family Futures. For, he's not dead. He's not dead yet. But if I hadn't gotten involved, if this had continued, families like his don't usually survive this kind of systematic destruction." As Jake prepared to leave the suite, Sarah approached him one last time. "Mr. Castellano, I still don't understand why you helped us." Jake considered the question. The honest answer was complicated. Part business calculation, part personal ethics, part recognition that in a world full of predators, someone had to occasionally protect the innocent. "Mrs. Walsh, in my line of work, reputation is everything. But there are different kinds of reputation. I could be known as the man who destroys anyone who crosses him, regardless of collateral damage. Or I could be known as the man who destroys anyone who crosses him while protecting the people they try to hurt in the process." He paused, looking at Tommy. "The second reputation is more useful. It means that when people have problems with my organization, they come to me directly instead of targeting innocent bystanders. It means families like yours stay out of harm's way. So this was all about business?" Jake smiled. "Mrs. Walsh, if this was just about business, I would have gotten my money back and moved on. The fact that Tommy gets his bicycle back, that you get a fresh start, that Vincent's nephew has to explain to his uncle why he sold a child's toy to a pawn shop, that's personal. Why personal? Because I was 6 years old once. And I remember what it felt like when the adults in my world forgot that kids just want to feel safe and loved." As Jake walked toward the elevator, he heard Tommy's voice behind him. "Mummy, is Mr. Jake really like Spider-Man?" Sarah's response was soft but clear. "I think he might be, baby, I think he might be." Timeline. 3 weeks after, the knock on Jake's office door came at precisely 9 a.m. on a Tuesday morning that had started like any other. Tommy Walsh stood in the hallway, small hand clasped in his mother's, wearing a new backpack and the kind of nervous expression kids get when they're not sure if they're in trouble. "Tommy wanted to thank you personally," Sarah explained, "for the bicycle and for everything else." Jake gestured them into his office, a space that carefully balanced legitimate business decor with subtle reminders of why crossing him was inadvisable. Tommy's eyes immediately went to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the strip, fascination replacing nervousness. "This is the tallest building ever," Tommy announced with 6-year-old certainty. "Not quite," Jake replied, "but it's tall enough to see everything important in Las Vegas." He crouched down to Tommy's level. "How's the bike working out?" "It's perfect, and it still has all the Spider-Man stickers." Tommy paused, then added seriously, "Mommy says you're really busy, so I should say thank you fast." "Take your time, buddy. Important things deserve careful consideration." What happened next surprised Jake. Instead of a quick thank you, Tommy reached into his backpack and pulled out a carefully folded piece of paper. "I drew this for you," Tommy said, unfolding what was clearly a detailed crayon masterpiece. "It's you and me and Mommy, and we're all safe." The drawing showed 3 stick figures standing in front of what was presumably Jake's building. He was depicted wearing a cape and had been labeled Mr. Jake Spider-Man. Sarah was labeled Best Mommy, and Tommy had drawn himself with an enormous smile and the words, "Happy Boy," written underneath. "This is amazing," Jake said, and meant it. "Can I keep it?" Tommy nodded enthusiastically. "It's yours forever." As Jake carefully pinned the drawing to his office bulletin board, between quarterly profit reports and surveillance photos, his secure phone buzzed with an incoming call from Ghost. "Excuse me for just a moment," he told Sarah and Tommy, stepping to his desk. "Boss, we have a problem." Ghost's voice was tense, which was unusual for someone who typically approached situations with calm professionalism. "Someone's been asking questions about the Walsh situation." Jake felt his chest tighten. "What kind of questions?" "Federal questions. Agent Sarah Chen, Financial Crimes Unit. She's been interviewing pawn shop owners, checking hospital records, looking into the Torino business transfers. Someone tipped her off that there might be more to Vincent's sudden cooperation than meets the eye." This was the nightmare scenario Jake had hoped to avoid. Federal attention meant investigations, and investigations meant scrutiny of his entire operation. How much does she know? Enough to be interested. She's connected the cryptocurrency theft to Vincent's sudden business liquidation, and she's figured out that someone with resources intervened on behalf of Sarah Walsh. Jake glanced at Sarah and Tommy, who were now looking at the city view and pointing out landmarks. The federal government didn't care about his motivations. Helping an innocent family would be irrelevant if they could prove his methods involved extortion, money laundering, or conspiracy. "Where is Agent Chen now?" 3 blocks from your building. She's got Vincent's financial records, and she's planning to interview him this afternoon. Jake's mind raced through possibilities. Vincent was desperate, facing financial ruin and potential prison time. If Agent Chen offered him a deal, reduced charges in exchange for testimony about Jake's involvement, the old man might talk to save himself. "Can we delay her?" "Not without raising suspicions, but boss, there's something else. Agent Chen's case file includes information about organized crime families using cryptocurrency for money laundering. She's not just investigating the Torino situation. She's building a broader case against digital financial crimes in Nevada." This kept getting worse. Jake had spent 18 months carefully structuring his operations to avoid federal attention, using legitimate businesses to wash money and staying ahead of law enforcement. But if Agent Chen was specifically targeting cryptocurrency-based crime, his entire operation was potentially at risk. "I need options." Ghost? Option 1, full legal defense. Hire the best attorneys money can buy, claim everything was legitimate business acquisition, deny knowledge of the cryptocurrency theft. Success probability? Maybe 60%, but even if you win, the investigation exposes our entire operation to scrutiny. Your legitimate businesses get audited, your associates get questioned, your carefully constructed public image gets damaged. Jake walked to the window, looking down at the city he'd learned to navigate through a careful balance of fear and respect. Below him, tourists and locals went about their daily lives, completely unaware that a federal investigation might be about to reshape Las Vegas's criminal landscape. Option 2. Agent Chen has a reputation for being tough but fair. She makes deals with people who provide valuable information about larger targets. You're suggesting I flip on someone else? I'm suggesting you give her something more valuable than your operation. Someone whose prosecution would advance her career more than yours would. Jake considered this. The federal government loved high-profile cases, especially ones that made them look like they were winning the war on organized crime. if he could provide Agent Chen with information that led to a more significant arrest. Who did you have in mind? Vincent's cryptocurrency operations weren't independent. He was working with associates from other cities who've been using digital currencies to move money regionally. Vincent has records, account information, details about operations in multiple states. This was interesting. Vincent's desperation had made him careless, and his carelessness had potentially exposed a larger criminal network. If Jake could deliver that information to Agent Chen, she'd have a case that would make headlines and advance her career significantly. The problem, Ghost continued, is that Vincent doesn't know we have access to this information. If we turn it over to the FBI, it'll be obvious that someone with technical capabilities was involved in taking down his operation. Jake turned back to Sarah and Tommy, who were now examining his collection of vintage poker chips. The boy was carefully arranging them by color, completely absorbed in the simple task of creating order from chaos. Ghost, what if Vincent voluntarily cooperated with the FBI? That would solve the exposure problem, but why would he cooperate? He's facing serious consequences either way. Jake smiled. Sometimes the best solutions required thinking several moves ahead, because Vincent doesn't know that Agent Chen is investigating him specifically. He thinks his only problem is me. If someone were to inform him that the FBI was building a case against the entire regional network and that his only chance of avoiding 20 years in federal prison was to provide evidence against his associates, he'd cooperate immediately, Ghost finished. And Agent Chen would get a case that makes her career while keeping you completely out of it. Can you arrange for Vincent to receive this information through unofficial channels? Already working on it. Give me 2 hours. Jake ended the call and returned to his guests. Sarah was watching him with the kind of concerned expression that suggested she'd picked up on the tension in his voice, even if she hadn't understood the specifics. Is everything okay? She asked. Just business complications, Jake replied. Nothing that can't be handled. Tommy looked up from his poker chip arrangement. Mr. Jake, are you Spider-Man because you fix problems? Something like that, buddy. Do you ever get scared when you fix problems? The question was more perceptive than Jake had expected from a 6-year-old. Sometimes, but being scared doesn't mean you stop trying to help people. It just means you have to be extra careful. Like when Mommy was scared about the bad men, but she still protected me. Jake glanced at Sarah, who nodded. Tommy hid in the bathroom when Danny came to the apartment, but he could hear everything. This explained the boy's resilience, his ability to adapt to suddenly changed circumstances. He'd been scared, but he'd also seen his mother stand between him and danger. Kids learned more from what they observed than from what adults told them. Exactly like that, Jake confirmed. Your mom was very brave. An hour later, after Sarah and Tommy had left with promises to stay in touch, Jake received an encrypted message from Ghost. Vincent just received information about FBI interest in regional cryptocurrency operations. He's requesting an emergency meeting with federal authorities. Should I facilitate? Yes. Make sure he understands that his cooperation needs to be complete and immediate. Understood. What about our exposure risk? Jake thought about Tommy's drawing, now prominently displayed on his bulletin board between quarterly profit reports and law enforcement surveillance photos. The boy had drawn them all as safe, protected, happy, minimal. If anyone asks how Vincent obtained his information, he received an anonymous tip from someone concerned about regional families moving into Nevada territory. Happens all the time in our business. And if Agent Chen wants to interview you, then I'm a legitimate businessman who was as surprised as anyone when Vincent Torino suddenly liquidated his assets and approached the FBI with information about regional financial crimes. 3 hours later, local news was reporting that federal agents had arrested 8 members of a regional organized crime network in connection with a cryptocurrency money laundering operation. Vincent Torino, described as a cooperating witness, had provided crucial evidence that led to the arrests. Agent Chen would get the career-making case she needed. Vincent would get protective custody and a reduced sentence. The regional families would get federal prison terms, and Jake would get to remain in Las Vegas, running his carefully balanced operation while occasionally protecting innocent families from the kind of predators who thought single mothers and small children made appropriate targets. That evening, Jake stood in his office looking out at the lights of a city that never slept. His secure phone buzzed with one final message from Ghost. Agent Chen's investigation into the Torino situation has been officially closed. No federal interest in local business acquisitions. or family assistance programs. Good. What's our status with the regional prosecutions? Vincent's testimony is comprehensive. 8 arrests, significant assets seized, and a federal task force being formed to investigate cryptocurrency crime regionally. Agent Chen is being considered for promotion to head the task force. Perfect outcome for everyone involved. Almost everyone. The regional families probably won't be sending holiday cards. Jake smiled, typing back, "I'll survive the disappointment." Boss, one more thing. Sarah Walsh received a job offer today. Assistant manager at a major hotel's event planning department. Good pay, full benefits, schedule that works with Tommy's school. Coincidence? Let's call it a fortunate convergence of circumstances and qualifications. Jake poured himself a glass of wine and raised it toward the city. Sometimes the best victories were the ones where everyone got what they needed. Agent Chen got her career-making case. Vincent got a chance to stay out of federal prison. Sarah got financial stability and a future. And Tommy got to keep his bicycle. In Jake's world, that kind of symmetry was rarer than honest politicians or modest casino owners. But when it happened, when all the pieces aligned to create genuine justice instead of just revenge, it reminded him why he'd chosen to build something better than what he'd inherited. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Tommy says to tell Mr. Jake Spider-Man that we're safe and happy, and thank you for everything." Jake looked at the drawing on his bulletin board. 3 stick figures standing together, protected and loved. Tomorrow would bring new problems, new challenges, new opportunities to choose between the easy path and the right path. But tonight, a 6-year-old boy was sleeping safely in his own bed, his bicycle parked securely in the hallway, dreaming of superheroes who understood that the most important thing wasn't being the strongest or the scariest. It was being someone who showed up when families needed protection. Timeline 6 weeks after. Jake was reviewing investment portfolios when his secure phone rang with the specific tone that meant someone was about to ruin his perfectly planned Tuesday morning. The caller ID showed a number he recognized but hadn't expected to see again. Sarah Walsh. "Mrs. Walsh," he answered, already reaching for his gun in the desk drawer because in his experience, unexpected calls from people under his protection usually meant someone hadn't gotten the message about leaving them alone. "Mr. Castellano?" Sarah's voice was strained, barely controlled panic, wrapped in forced politeness. "I'm sorry to bother you, but something's happened. Something terrible." Jake was already standing, moving toward his office's security monitors. "Where are you now?" "Valley Hospital. Tommy's in surgery. Someone—" Her voice broke. "Someone ran him down in the school parking lot, hit and run. The doctors say he might not— I'm on my way." Jake ended the call and immediately called Ghost. "Emergency protocol. Sarah Walsh's son was just attacked. I need security footage, witness statements, license plates, anything from the school area between 2 and 4 p.m. today. Already pulling traffic cameras. Boss, if this is retaliation for the Torino situation, then someone's about to learn why I have a reputation for disproportionate responses to threats against families under my protection." Jake grabbed his jacket and headed for the elevator, his mind already calculating possibilities. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental. 6 weeks had passed since Vincent's cooperation had led to the regional arrests, long enough for surviving family members to identify who had been responsible for their associates' federal prison sentences. Valley Hospital's pediatric ICU was a special kind of hell. All fluorescent lights and antiseptic smells, and the particular silence that hung around places where children fought for their lives. Jake found Sarah in the waiting room, her hands shaking as she clutched a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. "What do the doctors say?" he asked, sitting beside her. "Internal bleeding, broken ribs, possible brain trauma. They won't know the extent of the damage until the swelling goes down." Sarah's voice was mechanical, the flat tone of someone operating on autopilot to avoid complete breakdown. He was just walking to the car. "I was talking to his teacher, and Tommy ran ahead like he always does, and then—" She stopped, unable to continue. Jake pulled out his phone, showing her a photo that Ghost had just sent. Black SUV, Nevada plates, captured by a traffic camera 6 blocks from the school. "Did you see the vehicle?" Sarah nodded. "Big black truck, tinted windows. It accelerated toward him like it was intentional. Then it just drove away." Jake felt something cold and final settle in his chest. Someone had deliberately run down a 6-year-old boy to send a message. In his world, there were lines you didn't cross, and targeting children was so far beyond those lines that it existed in a different moral universe entirely. His phone buzzed with a message from Ghost, license plate registered to East Coast Transport LLC, company owned by Anthony Torino, Vincent's nephew. Vehicle reported stolen 2 hours after the incident. Jake typed back, current location of Anthony Torino, McCarran Airport, private terminal. Chartered jet filed flight plan to New York 30 minutes ago. Can you delay the flight legally? Working on it. May be able to trigger a routine FAA safety inspection. Jake looked at Sarah, who was staring at the ICU doors like she could will Tommy to recover through sheer determination. Mrs. Walsh, I need you to understand something. This wasn't random. Someone targeted Tommy specifically to hurt me. Sarah's head snapped toward him, her exhausted expression sharpening into something more focused. What do you mean? Vincent Torino has family on the East Coast, people who are currently facing federal prison sentences because of the information he provided to the FBI. They're angry, desperate, and apparently stupid enough to think that hurting you and Tommy would be an appropriate form of revenge. You said we'd be safe. You were safe. You are safe. This is someone new, someone who doesn't understand the rules. Jake stood, his voice taking on the edge that made subordinates nervous and enemies reconsider their life choices. Mrs. Walsh, I want you to know that what happened to Tommy will be answered for, completely and permanently. I don't want revenge, Mr. Castellano. I just want my son to wake up. You'll have both. Jake stepped into the hallway and called Tony. Assemble the team, full operational capacity. Someone just declared war on our family protection protocols. What do you need, boss? Anthony Torino, Vincent's nephew. He's currently at McCarran Airport trying to flee to New York after running down a 6-year-old boy with a stolen vehicle. The silence on the other end of the line spoke volumes. Tony had children of his own. How do you want this handled? Carefully. We're going to have a conversation with Mr. Torino about appropriate business conduct and the consequences of targeting non-combatants, especially child non-combatants. And after the conversation, Jake considered this. In the old days, someone who hurt a kid under his protection would simply disappear, their body found months later, in a condition that served as a warning to anyone else who might harbor similar intentions. But Jake had built his reputation on being more strategic than his predecessors. After the conversation, Mr. Torino is going to spend the rest of his life making amends for what he did today, starting with covering Tommy's medical expenses and ending with whatever charitable work I determine is appropriate for someone seeking redemption for attempted murder of a child. 40 minutes later, Jake stood in a private hangar at McCarran Airport, watching Anthony Torino pace nervously beside a Gulfstream jet that had developed sudden and mysterious mechanical problems requiring an FAA safety inspection. The man was younger than Jake had expected, maybe 28, with the kind of expensive clothes and entitled posture that suggested he'd never faced real consequences for his actions. "Anthony!" Jake called out, walking across the tarmac with Tony and 2 other associates flanking him. "We need to chat." Anthony's face went white. "Castellano, I heard you might want to talk." "Really? What gave you that impression? Was it the 6-year-old boy you left bleeding in a hospital parking lot?" "Look, that was business." Jake moved faster than Anthony had anticipated, closing the distance between them in 3 strides, his hand locked around the younger man's throat, applying just enough pressure to make breathing difficult without causing permanent damage. "Business," Jake repeated softly. "You think running down a child is business?" "My uncle," Anthony wheezed. "Your uncle is in federal protective custody because he was smart enough to cooperate with law enforcement instead of pursuing a vendetta that would have gotten him killed. You, apparently, didn't inherit his survival instincts." Jake released his grip, and Anthony stumbled backward, gasping. "Here's what's going to happen," Jake continued conversationally. "You're going to return to New York and inform your remaining family members that their war is with the federal government, not with me. Any further attempts to harm innocent people under my protection will result in responses that make today's conversation seem like a friendly business meeting. And if I refuse?" Jake pulled out his phone, showing Anthony a video that Ghost had compiled. Security footage from different locations, clearly showing Anthony's vehicle near the school, accelerating toward Tommy, then fleeing the scene. This goes to the FBI, the Nevada State Police, and every major news network in the country. East Coast crime family member attempts murder of 6-year-old boy in revenge attack. How do you think that plays in the media? How do you think it affects your family's remaining business operations? Anthony stared at the phone, understanding dawning on his face. In the modern world, video evidence was more devastating than any physical violence Jake could inflict. What do you want? Tommy Walsh's medical expenses, all of them, present and future, paid anonymously through a fund that will be established by tomorrow morning. How much are we talking? However much it costs. Brain surgery, rehabilitation, therapy, special education if necessary, everything, for the rest of his life if needed. That could be millions. Then I suggest you find millions. Your family's been running money through East Coast Transport for years. Don't pretend poverty. Jake nodded to Tony, who handed Anthony a business card. That's the contact information for Tommy's trust fund administrator. The first payment is due within 24 hours. Subsequent payments will be automatically debited from your accounts on a schedule to be determined by Tommy's medical needs. And if the payments stop? Jake smiled, but it wasn't warm. Then the video gets released and you spend the next 20 years in federal prison, explaining to other inmates why you tried to murder a first grader. This is extortion. This is justice, Anthony. Extortion would be if I demanded money for my own benefit. This is you taking responsibility for the consequences of your actions. As Anthony's jet finally departed Las Vegas, after its mysterious mechanical problems had been resolved, Jake returned to the hospital. Sarah was still in the waiting room, but now she was sitting with an older woman who had the same green eyes and stubborn chin. "My mother," Sarah explained. "She drove down from Reno when she heard." The older woman extended her hand. "Margaret Walsh. Sarah's told me what you've done for them, for Tommy." Jake shook her hand, noting the calluses that spoke of decades of hard work. "Mrs. Walsh, I'm sorry this happened. It won't happen again. Sarah says you think someone targeted Tommy because of you." "Yes, ma'am. And they've been convinced that further targeting would be inadvisable." Margaret studied him with the kind of direct gaze that suggested she'd raised children and dealt with difficult men and wasn't impressed by either expensive suits or carefully controlled danger. "Are you a good man, Mr. Castellano?" The question caught Jake off guard. Most people in his world were more concerned with whether he was effective, profitable, or dangerous than whether he was good. "I try to be, ma'am, in a business that doesn't always reward goodness." "But you protect families." "I protect families." Margaret nodded slowly. "Then we understand each other." Timeline: 2 days later. Tommy emerged from surgery with cautiously optimistic prognosis from the doctors. No permanent brain damage, though he'd need months of physical therapy and would probably walk with a slight limp for the rest of his life. "Can we see him?" Sarah asked. "He's still unconscious from the anesthesia, but yes, one at a time, 5 minutes each." Sarah went first, emerging 10 minutes later with tears streaming down her face. "He looks so small," she whispered. When Jake's turn came, he stood beside Tommy's bed, looking at the boy who'd drawn him as Spider-Man, and thanked him for making the world safe. Tubes and monitors surrounded the small figure, but his breathing was steady, strong. "Hey, buddy," Jake said softly. "You scared us pretty good there, but you're going to be okay. The doctors fixed everything, and you're going to be stronger than ever." He pulled out his phone, showing Tommy's unconscious form a photo that Ghost had sent. Anthony Torino's bank account, showing a substantial transfer to the Tommy Walsh Medical Trust. "The bad guy who hurt you is going to help pay for your recovery. It's not enough to make up for what he did, but it's a start. And I promise you, Tommy, nobody's ever going to hurt you again. Not while I'm around to prevent it." As Jake prepared to leave the hospital, his phone buzzed with a text from Ghost. "Anthony Torino landed in New York 2 hours ago. His family's attorneys are already contacting the FBI to discuss plea negotiations for the regional cases. Apparently, they've decided that cooperation is preferable to further escalation." Jake typed back, "Good. Send Sarah Walsh's mother the contact information for the medical trust. She strikes me as someone who'll make sure every penny is properly managed." Already done. Also, there's something else. Tommy's teacher wants to organize a fundraiser for his medical expenses. Should I discourage it? No. Let the community help. The trust covers everything, but people need to feel like they're contributing. Donate the fundraiser money to the school's emergency assistance program. Understood. What about ongoing security for the Walsh family? Jake considered this. The immediate threat was over, but Anthony's attack had demonstrated that his protection couldn't prevent every possible danger. Upgrade the security system at Sarah's apartment. Better locks, cameras, direct connection to our monitoring center. and find Tommy a private tutor for when he's ready to return to school. Someone with security training. A bodyguard disguised as a tutor who can also ensure that nobody ever gets close enough to hurt him again. Timeline 3 days later. Tommy woke up asking for his bicycle and wondering why everyone looked so worried. The doctors said his recovery was progressing better than expected, though he'd need several weeks of physical therapy before he could ride again. "Mr. Jake came to see you," Sarah told him. "He brought you something." She handed Tommy a package that Jake had left, a new Spider-Man action figure, but this one was different. It wore a business suit instead of a costume, and someone had carefully painted Protection Man on the base. "Cool," Tommy said, examining the figure. "He looks like he helps people." "He does," Sarah agreed. "He definitely does." That evening, Jake stood in his office looking at the drawing Tommy had given him, 3 stick figures labeled Mr. Jake Spider-Man, Best Mommy, and Happy Boy. Someone had tried to destroy that happiness, had thought they could hurt a child to make a point about adult business. They'd been wrong. Jake's phone rang. Sarah Walsh. "Mr. Castellano, Tommy wanted to talk to you." A moment later, Tommy's voice came through the phone, still weak but determined. "Mr. Jake, the doctor says I'm going to be okay, and Mommy says the bad man can't hurt us anymore because you fixed it." "That's right. Buddy, you're safe now forever. Can I ask you something?" "Of course. When I get better, can I help you protect other families, like a real Spider-Man?" Jake smiled, looking out at the lights of Las Vegas. "Tommy, I think you already are helping, just by being brave and strong and reminding grown-ups what we're supposed to be protecting." "Cool. I can't wait to ride my bike again. It'll be waiting for you when you're ready." After ending the call, Jake sent one final message to Ghost. "Status report on the East Coast situation, complete surrender. They're cooperating with federal investigators, liquidating illegal operations, and have formally apologized for the unsanctioned attack on Tommy Walsh. Anthony Torino has been disowned by his own family for bringing law enforcement attention to their remaining activities. Perfect outcome. Almost perfect. There's still the matter of ensuring this never happens again." Jake thought about this. The attack on Tommy had been a wake-up call, proof that his protection was only as strong as his ability to anticipate threats and respond to them decisively. "Expand our intelligence network on potential threats. I want to know about any criminal organization that even considers operating against our interests in Nevada, and establish a protocol for family protection that includes threat assessment instead of just reactive responses." "Understood. Anything else?" Jake looked at Tommy's drawing one more time, remembering the boy's question about helping to protect other families. "Start researching other single mothers in similar situations, people who are struggling, vulnerable to exploitation, at risk of becoming targets for criminal organizations looking for scapegoats. Boss, that could be dozens of families. Then we'll help dozens of families. Call it the Tommy Walsh Protection Initiative." "Sir, Ghost, someone tried to murder a 6-year-old boy to send me a message. The message I received is that there are people in this world who will always choose to hurt the innocent rather than face the guilty directly. So I'm going to send a message of my own, which is that hurting innocent families in Nevada is the fastest way to discover exactly how creative I can be when determining appropriate responses to inappropriate behavior." Timeline. 4 months later, the Tommy Walsh Protection Initiative had quietly assisted 28 families, helping them avoid the kind of financial vulnerability that made them attractive targets for criminal exploitation. Tommy had returned to school with a slight limp and a reputation as the bravest kid in 1st grade, and Anthony Torino was working at a community center in Brooklyn, having discovered that attempting to murder children carried consequences that extended far beyond legal penalties. In his world of carefully calculated responses and strategic operations, Jake had found something more valuable than fear or respect: the knowledge that sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was ensure that a 6-year-old boy could ride his bicycle without looking over his shoulder for monsters. Timeline. 8 months after Tommy's 7th birthday. The conference room at the FBI's Las Vegas field office was the kind of sterile, fluorescent-lit space designed to make people uncomfortable and talkative. Jake sat across from Agent Sarah Chen, noting her meticulously organized files and the digital recorder positioned precisely between them. After 2 years of successfully avoiding federal attention, he was finally having the conversation he'd always known was inevitable. "Mr. Castellano," Agent Chen began, "thank you for agreeing to this interview, As I mentioned, you're not under arrest, and you're free to leave at any time. Happy to help, Jake replied, settling back in his chair with the relaxed confidence of someone who had nothing to hide because he'd been very careful about what could be proven. Though I'm not sure what I can tell you that you don't already know from public records. Agent Chen opened her first file, revealing financial documents, surveillance photos, and what appeared to be a comprehensive timeline of his activities over the past 2 years. Your legitimate businesses have been remarkably successful, she observed. Real estate, technology investments, hospitality ventures, you've built quite an operation for someone who's only 28 years old. Good lawyers, reliable advisors, and a talent for recognizing undervalued opportunities. Opportunities like Vincent Torino's sudden decision to liquidate his assets? Jake had been expecting this question for months. Mr. Torino approached me with a business proposition. He needed liquidity quickly, and I was able to offer him terms that met his timeline. Standard commercial transaction for substantially below market value. The market value of legitimate businesses that happen to be owned by people under federal investigation tends to fluctuate significantly. Agent Chen made a note, her expression giving nothing away. You're aware that Mr. Torino subsequently became a federal witness in a major organized crime prosecution. I read about it in the newspapers. Quite a surprise, actually. Vincent always struck me as old school, the kind of man who would handle his problems internally rather than involving law enforcement. Yet you weren't surprised enough to distance yourself from businesses you'd acquired from a federal witness. Jake smiled. Agent Chen, if I avoided every business opportunity that involved people with complicated legal situations, I'd be limiting myself to a very small market in Las Vegas. Besides, once I acquired those assets, they became my responsibility to operate legitimately and transparently. Agent Chen opened her second file, and Jake felt his chest tighten slightly. Photos of Sarah and Tommy Walsh, medical records from Tommy's hospitalization, financial records showing substantial anonymous donations to the Tommy Walsh Medical Trust. Let's talk about the Walsh family, Agent Chen said. I'm not sure what there is to discuss. Mrs. Walsh is an employee of one of my hospitality properties. Bright woman, excellent work ethic, devoted mother. She was also the victim of identity theft that resulted in $3 million being stolen from your cryptocurrency accounts, which was resolved when the actual perpetrator was identified, Kevin Brennan, who subsequently left the country and hasn't been seen since. Jake spread his hands in a gesture of mild confusion. I understand he decided to pursue opportunities overseas. Young people these days are very mobile. Agent Chen leaned forward slightly. Mr. Castellano, what I find interesting is how all of these situations resolve themselves so neatly. Vincent Torino cooperates with the FBI and avoids prosecution. Kevin Brennan disappears, but the stolen money is recovered. The East Coast families that were arrested had no interest in pursuing further action against either you or the Walsh family. Sometimes justice works efficiently when people make smart decisions about cooperation and accountability. And sometimes justice requires a little encouragement. The accusation hung in the air between them. Jake maintained his relaxed posture, but his mind was calculating possibilities. How much did Agent Chen actually know versus how much was she fishing for? Agent Chen, I think you're giving me too much credit. I'm a businessman who got lucky with a few investments and unlucky with a cybersecurity breach. Everything else is just coincidence. Agent Chen opened her third file, and Jake felt his pulse quicken. Surveillance photos of him entering and leaving the hospital where Tommy was treated. Banking records showing the establishment of the Tommy Walsh Medical Trust. Phone records that, while encrypted, clearly showed communication patterns consistent with coordinating operations. 8 months ago, Tommy Walsh was the victim of a hit-and-run attack, Agent Chen said. The perpetrator was Anthony Torino, Vincent's nephew, who we believe was retaliating for his family's arrests. Terrible tragedy. I was relieved to hear the boy recovered. Anthony Torino was never prosecuted for that attack. Instead, he returned to New York, where he suddenly began cooperating with federal investigators and making substantial charitable donations to children's hospitals. People sometimes find perspective after traumatic events, or they find Jake Castellano. Jake leaned forward, his voice taking on a slight edge. Agent Chen, are you accusing me of something specific? Because if you are, I'd like to call my attorney. If you're not, then I'm curious about the purpose of this conversation. Agent Chen closed the files and leaned back in her chair. studying him with the kind of direct gaze that suggested she'd made some kind of decision. "Mr. Castellano, in my 15 years with the Bureau, I've investigated dozens of organized crime figures. Most of them are violent, destructive, or both. They hurt innocent people, destroy communities, and view law enforcement as an enemy to be avoided or corrupted." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "You're different. In the past 2 years, your activities have coincided with the prosecution of a major regional criminal conspiracy, the protection of a family that was being systematically destroyed by identity theft, and the prevention of revenge attacks against a child. The methods may have been unconventional, but the outcomes have been beneficial." Jake said nothing, waiting to see where this was leading. "I'm not going to arrest you today," Agent Chen continued. "I don't have enough evidence to prove criminal activity, and frankly, I'm not sure I want to. But I need you to understand something. I'll be watching. If your methods ever cross the line from protective to predatory, if innocent people ever get hurt because of your business decisions, if you ever become the kind of criminal I usually investigate, that protection ends immediately. And if I continue operating the way I have been," Agent Chen stood, gathering her files, "then I suppose Las Vegas is fortunate to have someone with your particular skill set, keeping an eye on things. Unofficially, of course." After Agent Chen left, Jake sat alone in the conference room for several minutes, processing what had just happened. The FBI knew exactly who he was and what he did, but they were choosing not to act on that knowledge as long as his activities remained focused on protecting innocent people rather than exploiting them. It was a form of law enforcement cooperation he'd never encountered. A federal agent essentially granting him permission to continue operating outside the legal system as long as he used that freedom responsibly. His phone buzzed with a message from Ghost. "How did it go?" Jake typed back. "Better than expected. Agent Chen isn't interested in prosecuting someone whose activities result in federal arrests and child protection. So, we're clear?" "We're clear, as long as we continue being the good guys. Speaking of which, I have an update on the Walsh family. Tommy's physical therapy is going well, and Sarah has been promoted to senior event coordinator. They're doing well." "Good. Any new threats we need to monitor?" "Nothing active. The East Coast families are still cooperating with federal investigations, and word has spread that targeting families under your protection is inadvisable. I think we've established an effective deterrent." Jake smiled, typing, "Sometimes the best reputation is the one that prevents problems before they start." "Boss, there's something else. I've been monitoring local news and social services for situations similar to what happened with the Walsh family. People being exploited, families being threatened, children at risk. How many? In Nevada alone? Dozens. Across the region? Hundreds." Jake considered this. The Tommy Walsh Protection Initiative had been successful, but it was also limited in scope. If they were going to make a real difference, they needed to think bigger. "Ghost, how difficult would it be to expand our operations? Not just reactive protection for families that are already being targeted, but proactive identification and assistance for people who are vulnerable to exploitation. Technically feasible, but it would require significant resources and careful coordination to avoid attracting unwanted attention. We just had a conversation with the FBI that suggests law enforcement attention isn't necessarily a problem, as long as our activities serve public interests. You want to go legitimate?" Jake thought about this. Not legitimate, exactly. There would always be aspects of his business that existed in legal gray areas, but perhaps there was a way to structure his operations so that the positive outcomes were visible and defensible, while the questionable methods remained hidden. "I want to go effective. If we're going to be the good guys, let's be the best good guys we can be." Timeline: 2 hours later. Jake stood in his office looking at Tommy's drawing, still pinned to his bulletin board between quarterly profit reports and surveillance photos. 3 stick figures: Mr. Jake Spider-Man, Best Mommy, and Happy Boy. His phone rang. Sarah Walsh. "Mr. Castellano, I hope I'm not bothering you." "Never, Mrs. Walsh. How's Tommy doing?" "Much better. He starts advanced physical therapy next week, and the doctors say he'll be able to run normally within a few months. But that's not why I'm calling." Jake waited. "I wanted to thank you, not just for the medical expenses or the job or the security upgrades, for everything. Tommy and I were drowning, and you saved us, not just from the people who were hurting us, but from a life of fear and poverty and hopelessness. You're very welcome." "There's something else." Tommy wants to know if you'll come to his birthday party next month. He's turning 7, and he says it wouldn't be a real party without Spider-Man there. Jake looked at his calendar, mentally rearranging meetings and operational planning sessions. I wouldn't miss it. He'll be so excited. Mr. Castellano, can I ask you something? Of course. Are there other families like us? People who need help, but don't know how to ask for it? The question surprised him. Why do you ask? Because I was thinking, I have a good job now, a safe place to live, resources I never had before. Maybe there's a way I could help other mothers who are in the situation I was in. Pay it forward, you know? Jake felt something shift in his chest, a recognition that Sarah Walsh had just provided the missing piece of a puzzle he'd been trying to solve. Mrs. Walsh, what would you say to a proposition? A legitimate business opportunity that would allow you to help other families while building a career doing work that matters. I'd say I'm interested. Excellent. We should discuss it in detail. How about lunch tomorrow? After ending the call, Jake sent one final message to Ghost. Change of plans for the expansion project. Instead of a purely security-based operation, I want to establish something more comprehensive. Family assistance, job placement, financial education, child protection services, everything wrapped into a legitimate non-profit organization. Who runs it? Sarah Walsh. She understands the problem from the inside, she has the motivation to solve it, and she has the credibility to work with families who need help. And our role? Anonymous benefactor and silent security provider. We fund the operation, provide protection when necessary, and handle problems that can't be resolved through legitimate channels. So we become superheroes with proper 501c3 documentation? Jake laughed, looking at Tommy's drawing one more time. Mr. Jake Spider-Man, protecting best mommy and happy boy. Ghost, sometimes the most effective way to fight crime is to prevent it before it starts. Help families before they become vulnerable. Provide resources before desperation drives people to make dangerous choices. Protect children before they become targets. That's not how organized crime usually works. Then maybe it's time to organize crime differently. Timeline. 4 months later, Tommy's birthday party. The Sarah Walsh Family Protection Foundation had assisted over 50 families across Nevada, providing everything from emergency financial assistance to job training to childcare services. Jake remained an anonymous donor, though Sarah suspected his involvement and had never asked direct questions. Tommy's 7th birthday party was held at Chuck E. Cheese, which Tommy had declared the most epic place ever for a Spider-Man party. Jake arrived in a business suit, carrying a carefully wrapped present, a new bicycle with more Spider-Man stickers than any reasonable vehicle should possess. Mr. Jake, Tommy ran over, his limp barely noticeable now. You came, and you brought a present. Happy birthday, buddy. How does it feel to be 7? Awesome, I'm old enough to help Mommy with her new job now. She helps other kids whose mommies need protection, just like you protected us. Jake looked across the room at Sarah, who was organizing games for a dozen children while simultaneously fielding phone calls from families who needed assistance. She'd found her calling, turning her own experience with vulnerability into expertise in helping others. Tommy, Jake said, you know what the most important thing about being a superhero is? Being strong, being kind. The strongest heroes are the ones who use their power to help people who can't help themselves. Tommy nodded seriously. Like how you helped us and now we help other people. Exactly like that. As the party continued around them, children laughing, parents relaxing, families celebrating the simple joy of being safe and together, Jake felt a satisfaction deeper than any business victory or criminal conquest had ever provided. His phone buzzed with a text from Agent Chen. Saw the news about the Family Protection Foundation. Nice work. Keep it up. Keep. Jake typed back, sometimes the best way to fight crime is to prevent people from becoming criminals in the first place. Couldn't agree more. Stay in touch. As the sun set over Las Vegas, painting the desert sky in shades of gold and orange, Jake stood watching Tommy ride his new bicycle around the Chuck E. Cheese parking lot, while Sarah supervised from nearby. The boy was laughing, completely unafraid, surrounded by the kind of security that came from knowing there were adults in his world who would never let harm come to him. In his business, reputation was everything, but Jake had discovered something more valuable than fear or respect. The knowledge that his reputation now included being someone who showed up when families needed protection, who turned dangerous situations into opportunities for justice, who understood that the most important victories were measured in children's laughter rather than enemy defeats. "Mr. Jake," Tommy called out, stopping his bicycle beside him. "When I grow up, can I help protect families like you do?" Jake looked at the boy who'd drawn him as Spider-Man, who'd survived an attack that would have broken most adults, who'd watched his mother transform from victim to advocate, and understood that strength came from helping others. "Tommy, I think you're already protecting families, just by showing other kids that they can be brave, that they can survive scary things, that there are always people who will fight for them." "Cool." Tommy grinned and pedaled away, completely unaware that his simple existence had changed the fundamental nature of organized crime in Las Vegas. As Jake drove home through the neon-lit streets of the city, he'd learned to protect instead of simply control. He thought about the drawing still pinned to his bulletin board. 3 stick figures standing together, safe and happy and protected. Sometimes the best stories were the ones where everyone got exactly what they needed. Justice for the victims, consequences for the perpetrators, and a chance for tomorrow to be better than today. And sometimes a 6-year-old boy's bicycle was worth more than all the cryptocurrency in the world.